The great chamber of the Galactic Concorde was built to make visitors feel small. Its ceiling rose so high that clouds sometimes formed near the top. Its walls were carved from stone taken from 12 different homeworlds, each piece representing one of the founding species. Statues of ancient heroes lined the halls, their eyes looking down on anyone who dared to walk beneath them. Ambassador Elena Vasquez walked beneath them without fear. She was a small woman by any standard. Her hair had gone gray at the temples, and her face carried the lines of someone who had spent decades smiling at people she did not like. She wore the simple blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps, with no medals or decorations, compared to the Concorde delegates in their flowing robes and gleaming armor. She looked almost plain. This was exactly how she wanted to look. The 12 species of the Concorde sat in a curved row of elevated platforms, looking down at the speaking floor where Elena stood alone. The Kethrani delegate, Ambassador Voroth, sat at the center. His species resembled tall insects with fur arms and compound eyes that reflected the light, like broken mirrors. When he spoke, his voice buzzed and clicked in ways that the translator turned into cold, precise words. Ambassador Vasquez, Voroth said, "You have been summoned to answer for humanity's continued defiance." Elena clasped her hands behind her back. "I was not aware that humanity was being defiant, Ambassador. We have maintained peaceful relations with all Concorde species. We have honored every trade agreement. We have not claimed any territory that was previously occupied. You have refused full membership in the Concorde," said Delegate Miressa of the Vorlon Collective. Her species was aquatic, and she floated in a tank of greenish water, her tentacles pressing against the glass. "For 300 years, you have maintained observer status only. You reject our governance. You reject our protection. We value our independence," Elena replied. "This is not a rejection of the Concorde. It is simply a different path." Voroth leaned forward. His compound eyes seemed to multiply Elena's reflection into 100 tiny images. "A different path," he repeated. "Let me speak plainly, Ambassador. The Concorde has tolerated humanity's stubbornness for long enough. Your species is young. You have been traveling between stars for barely 3,000 years. The Kethrani alone have been a spacefaring people for 90,000 years. We have seen species like yours before. You grow quickly, spread carelessly, and eventually you become a problem." Elena said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence often revealed more than speech. "The Concorde has decided to offer humanity a final choice," Voroth continued. "You will accept full membership under Concorde governance. You will surrender your independent fleet to Concorde military oversight. You will pay tribute to the Concorde treasury in exchange for the protection we have been providing. These terms are not negotiable." A murmur ran through the chamber. Several delegates nodded their approval. Others watched Elena with curious eyes, waiting to see how the human would react. Elena allowed herself a slow breath. "And if we decline this generous offer?" Voroth's mandibles clicked together in what might have been a smile. "Then the Concorde will be forced to ensure galactic stability through other means. We have assembled a fleet of 4,000 warships at the edge of human space. They await my command. Humanity has 30 of your solar days to accept our terms. After that, we will proceed with forceful integration." The chamber fell silent. Every eye turned to Elena. She was supposed to tremble. She was supposed to beg. She was supposed to ask for mercy, to plead for more time, to offer desperate compromises. This was how it always went when the Concorde decided to absorb a younger species. The pattern had repeated dozens of times across galactic history. Elena did none of these things. "I understand," she said calmly. "I will need to consult with my government before providing a formal response. May I ask a few clarifying questions?" Voroth seemed surprised by her composure. "You may ask. The fleet you mentioned for 1,000 warships. This represents the combined military forces of all 12 Concorde species?" "It does. And these ships are currently positioned at coordinates that your intelligence services believe to be the main entry point to human space?" Voroth's eyes flickered. "Our intelligence is quite thorough." "I'm sure it is." Elena paused. "One more question, if I may. In your 90,000 years of spacefaring history, Ambassador Voroth, how many times has the Concorde been wrong about a younger species?" The question hung in the air. Voroth's mandibles clicked together rapidly, a sign of irritation. "We are never wrong, Ambassador. Our experience is vast beyond your comprehension." Elena nodded slowly. "Thank you for your time, Ambassador. You will have our answer within 30 days. She turned and walked out of the chamber without waiting to be dismissed. Her footsteps echoed against the ancient stone. The statues of fallen heroes watched her go. Behind her, Voroth turned to his fellow delegates. "She is afraid," he said. "They always are, at the end. The humans will surrender before the deadline. They have no choice." Delegate Maressa was not so certain. Something in the human ambassador's eyes had troubled her. It was not fear. It was something else entirely. But she said nothing, because she did not know how to name what she had seen. Elena Vasquez maintained her calm expression until she reached her private shuttle. The door sealed behind her. The engines hummed to life. Only when she was alone in the darkness of space did she allow herself to smile. She opened a secure channel to Earth. The encryption was layered so deeply that Concord intelligence would need 1,000 years to crack it. When the connection established, she spoke a single phrase. "They've finally asked to see the basement." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then a voice replied, heavy with exhaustion. "Understood. I'll wake the others." Elena leaned back in her seat and watched the stars stream past her window. 300 years, she thought. 300 years of pretending. 300 years of being underestimated, dismissed, and condescended to by species who thought humanity was nothing more than a young upstart. On the galactic stage, it had taken incredible patience. It had taken discipline that most species could never achieve. Every human ambassador, every diplomat, every captain had played their part in the great performance. They had smiled at insults. They had accepted unfair trade deals. They had retreated from border disputes they could have won easily. All of it had been a choice. And now the Concorde had finally pushed too far. Elena thought about her grandmother, who had been a diplomat before her. She thought about the stories her grandmother had told, passed down through generations, about the day humanity discovered what was waiting for them in the darkness between stars. She thought about the vote, the great referendum that had shaped human civilization for 3 centuries. The question had been simple. What kind of species do we want to be? Humanity had given its answer. And now, at last, the galaxy would understand what that answer meant. On Earth, in a facility buried deep beneath the Martian surface, Admiral James Okonkwo received Elena's message. He was an old man now, his dark skin lined with age, his hair gone completely white. He had spent his entire career preparing for this moment, hoping it would never come. He walked through corridors that few humans had ever seen. Security checkpoints scanned him with technologies that the Concorde did not know existed. Doors opened and closed behind him, each one sealing away another layer of secrets. At the end of the final corridor, he entered a command center filled with holographic displays and silent technicians. The main screen showed a map of human space, with the Concorde Armada represented as a red cloud at the border. His second in command, Captain Yuki Tanaka, looked up from her console. "Admiral, we received Ambassador Vasquez's message." "I know." Okonkwo stared at the map. "How long until the fleet is ready?" "The Inheritance fleet can be fully activated within 6 hours. All crews are on standby. We've been running readiness drills every month for the past 200 years. Okonkwo nodded slowly. 200 years. That was how long it had taken to train enough personnel to operate the ships they had found. 200 years of secret academies, hidden training facilities, and carefully selected volunteers who had sworn oaths of silence that they carried to their graves. "The Concorde is giving us 30 days, he said. "They expect us to spend that time begging. What will we actually be doing?" Okonkwo turned away from the map. His eyes were tired, but his voice was steady. "We will be preparing to show them the truth, and we will be hoping, right up until the last moment, that they choose to back down." Captain Tanaka frowned. "With respect, Admiral, they've brought 4,000 warships to our border. They're not going to back down, no," Okonkwo agreed. "They're not, but we have to give them the chance. That's the promise we made 300 years ago. We don't use what we found unless there's no other option. We don't become conquerors just because we have the power to conquer." He walked to a window that looked out over an enormous underground hangar. The space was so vast that the far walls disappeared into shadow, and in that shadow, shapes waited. Massive shapes, ships that dwarfed anything the Concorde had ever built, ships that had been sailing the stars before the Concorde species had learned to count. Activate. Protocol inheritance, Okonkwo said quietly. Begin TH. Terrace had spent 40 years studying humans. In that time, she had learned to read their facial expressions, understand their strange customs, and appreciate their unusual approach to art and music. She had written 17 academic papers on human culture. She was considered the foremost expert on humanity in the entire Morellian academic community. And yet, watching the data on her screen, she realized she had missed something important. Terrace was a Morellian, which meant she was small by galactic standards, with pale blue skin and large eyes adapted for the dim light of her home world. Her people valued knowledge above all else. They kept records of everything. They noticed patterns that other species overlooked. Right now, Terrace was noticing a pattern that made no sense. The Concorde Armada had been positioned at the human border for 3 days. Intelligence reports were flowing in from across human space, gathered by spy satellites and informant networks that the Concorde had spent centuries building. The reports all said the same thing. Nothing was happening. Human colonies were not evacuating. There were no refugee ships fleeing toward the galactic core. Military bases showed no signs of increased activity. Trade ships continued their normal routes. Children went to school. Workers went to their jobs. People lived their lives as if a massive invasion fleet was not aimed directly at their home world. Terrace had seen species face Concorde ultimatums before. She had studied the patterns. There was always panic. There was always desperation. Leaders made frantic diplomatic appeals. Populations hoarded food and supplies. Military commanders ran last-minute drills and repositioned their forces. Humanity was doing none of this. Either the humans were so naive that they didn't understand the danger they faced, or they knew something that the Concorde did not. Terrace pulled up older records. She had access to the full Morellian archives, which contained information gathered over tens of thousands of years. She searched for anything unusual in humanity's history, anything that didn't fit the pattern of a young spacefaring species. The first thing she found was a gap. Human records from approximately 250 years after first achieving faster-than-light travel showed a massive increase in construction activity. New facilities were built on Mars, on the moons of Jupiter, and in deep space locations that were never publicly documented. Official records claimed these facilities were research stations or mining operations, but the energy signatures didn't match. Terrace had studied enough industrial patterns to know what research stations looked like. These facilities were using power levels that suggested something much larger, something like shipyard construction. And yet, when she looked at the human fleet, the numbers didn't add up. Humanity's official military consisted of approximately 800 vessels of various sizes. That was a respectable force for a species their age, but it was nothing compared to the Concorde. It certainly wasn't enough to justify the construction activity she was seeing in the old records. Where had all that construction gone? Terrace dug deeper. She found references to something called Project Inheritance in declassified human documents, but every reference was vague, almost deliberately unclear. The project had been approved by unanimous vote of something called the United Earth Assembly. It had been funded by contributions from every human colony. And then, strangely, all references to it simply stopped. The project had not been canceled. It had not been completed. It had simply vanished from the public record, as if someone had decided that humanity should forget it ever existed. Terrace felt a chill run down her spine. Her people had a saying, "The most dangerous secrets are the ones that everyone agrees to keep." She gathered her findings and requested a meeting with High Commander Drex. He was the senior military officer in charge of the Concorde Armada, a Kethrani warrior who had crushed rebellions and conquered systems for thousands of years. If anyone would take her concerns seriously, it would be him. She was wrong. Drex received her in his command chamber aboard the flagship. He was massive, even by Kethrani standards, with a scarred carapace that showed the wounds of 100 battles. He listened to her presentation with his compound eyes fixed on the holographic displays, showing no reaction to anything she said. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "You are telling me," he said finally, "that you are concerned because the humans are not panicking. I am telling you that their behavior is inconsistent with every previous species we have encountered in this situation," Terrace replied. "The patterns do not match. They are acting as if they have no reason to fear us." Drex made a clicking sound that Terrace recognized as Kethrani laughter. "Scholar, you have spent too long studying books. Let me tell you what I see. I see a young species that has finally realized it cannot escape Concord authority. I see a people who are in denial about their situation. I see leaders who are hiding the truth from their population to prevent mass panic. But the construction records mean nothing. Perhaps they built mining stations. Perhaps they built research facilities. Perhaps they built monuments to their own foolishness. Whatever they built, it is not a fleet. We have monitored their shipyards for centuries. We know exactly how many warships they possess." Terrace hesitated. "What if they have shipyards that we don't know about?" Drex leaned forward, and his voice dropped to a dangerous hum. "The Concord has been watching this galaxy for 90,000 years. We have mapped every star, cataloged every planet, and monitored every species that has ever achieved spaceflight. There's nothing in this galaxy that we do not know about, Scholar. Nothing." He waved one of his four hands dismissively. "Go back to your books. Leave the military matters to those who understand them. The humans will surrender within the week. They have no other choice." Terrace left the command chamber with her concerns unaddressed. She returned to her quarters and stared at her research notes. Everything she knew about humanity told her that something was wrong. They were too calm, too confident. They were playing a role, just as Ambassador Vasquez had been playing a role in the Concord chamber. But what was the real script? She thought about the humans she had met over the years. They were a strange species. They laughed easily and cried easily. They formed bonds with other species that sometimes lasted longer than the bonds. They formed with each other. They were curious about everything, always asking questions, always wanting to learn. And they remembered. That was the thing that always struck Terrace about humans. They remembered their history with an intensity that bordered on obsession. They built monuments to their dead. They wrote books about their mistakes. They told stories about their ancestors to their children, ensuring that the past was never forgotten. What were they remembering that the Concord had overlooked? Terrace made a decision. She had contacts among the human academic community. Scholars she had corresponded with, researchers who had shared data with her for joint projects. She would reach out to them. Carefully, quietly, she would ask questions. She began composing a message to Professor David Chen at the University of Mars. He was a historian who specialized in the early spacefaring era. If anyone knew about Project Inheritance, it would be him. But before she could send the message, her screen flashed with an incoming transmission. It was from High Commander Drex's office that the countdown had begun. 27 days remained until the deadline. The Armada was beginning its slow advance toward human space. Scout ships were being deployed to gather final intelligence, and in the message, there was a note specifically for Terrace, by order of the High Commander. All non-military personnel are restricted from unauthorized communications with human contacts. Any attempt to warn the humans of Concord movements will be considered treason. Terrace deleted her unsent message. She was being watched now. Her concerns had made her suspect. She turned back to her records and kept searching. Somewhere in the data, there had to be an answer. Somewhere, there had to be a clue about what humanity was hiding. She found it 3 days later. It was a fragment of an old human transmission, intercepted by Concord intelligence during the early years of contact. The transmission had been flagged as unimportant and filed away in the archives. No one had looked at it into centuries. The transmission was a news broadcast from Earth. A reporter was interviewing a scientist about a discovery near Alpha Centauri. The video quality was poor, and the audio was filled with static. But Terrace could make out the key. Words: unprecedented find, ships of unknown. Origin: clearly artificial. Construction: carbon dating suggests age of approximately 2 million years. The transmission cut off there. The rest of the recording had been lost or corrupted. But Terrace understood what she had heard. 2 million years. Before the Kethrani, before the Mirelians, before any species in the Concorde had dreamed of reaching the stars, someone else had been there first, and somehow, impossibly, humanity had found them. Terrace sat in her quarters with her hearts pounding. She understood now why the humans weren't afraid. She understood why they had been so patient, so willing to accept insults and unfair treatment. They had been waiting. They had been waiting for the Concorde to push too far. They had been waiting for a reason to reveal what they had found in the darkness between the stars. And now that the Armada was advancing, now that the ultimatum had been delivered, humanity had that reason. Terrace looked out her window at the starst Concorde Armada crossed into human space. On the 28th day, High Commander Drex had expected resistance at the border. He had positioned his fastest ships at the front of the formation, ready to engage human patrol vessels. His weapons officers had their targeting systems locked on the predicted locations of human defensive platforms. They found nothing. The border stations were empty. The patrol routes were abandoned. The defensive platforms had been powered down and left drifting in the void. It was as if humanity had simply walked away from the edge of their territory and left the door open. Drex ordered his fleet forward. On the bridge of his flagship, he stood before the main view screen and watched the stars slide past. His officers worked their stations in silence, their compound eyes fixed on sensors that showed no enemy activity. "This is a trap," said Vice Commander Korath, his second in command. "They are drawing us in. Into what?" Drex replied, "We have skinned every system within 10 light years. There are no hidden fleets. There are no weapon platforms. There are no minefields. The humans have simply given up." Then why did they not surrender formally? Why did they not answer our ultimatum? Drex had no answer for this. Ambassador Vasquez had sent a single message on the final day of the deadline. It contained only 5 words: "We decline your generous offer." No explanation, no negotiation, no request for mercy, just a simple refusal, as if the humans did not understand or did not care what was about to happen to them. It was infuriating. It was confusing. And deep in his warrior's heart, in a place he would never acknowledge, it was frightening. The Armada pressed deeper into human space. They passed through colony systems where cities shone on the surfaces of planets, and orbital stations hummed with activity. No one fired on them. No one fled. People on the ground looked up at the Armada passing overhead and simply returned to their lives. On the 4th day of the invasion, Drex received a report from Terrace, the Mirelian scholar. She had found a way to reach him despite the communication restrictions. Her message was brief and desperate. "High Commander, you must stop the advance. I have found evidence of something in human history, something they discovered in their early spacefaring years. Please, I am begging you to listen." Drex deleted the message without reading it fully. Scholars, he thought. They saw mysteries everywhere. They forgot that sometimes the simplest explanation was the correct one. The humans were a young species. They had no ancient secrets. They had simply accepted defeat and were hoping that passive resistance would earn them better treatment. He would show them the error of this strategy. On the 7th day, the Armada reached a region of space that human charts marked as the Kepler threshold. The designation meant nothing to Concorde intelligence. It was simply an area of unremarkable space, empty of planets or resources, with no strategic value. The human charts also included a warning: navigational hazard. Avoid. Drex ordered his fleet to proceed through anyway. If the humans thought a navigation warning would stop for 1,000 warships, they were even more foolish than he had believed. The Armada entered the Kepler threshold in standard formation. Scouts at the front, heavy cruisers in the middle, support vessels at the rear. Drex stood on his bridge and watched the empty space ahead. And then the sensors began to scream. At first, Drex thought it was a malfunction. The readings made no sense. Mass signatures were appearing on every screen, vast masses, far larger than any ship the Concorde had ever built. The signatures were coming from everywhere at once, as if the empty space around the Armada was suddenly filled with objects that had not been there a moment before. "What is happening?" Drex demanded. "Report." His sensor officer's voice was shaking. "Commander, we are detecting ships Thousands of ships. They are emerging from some kind of concealment field. The technology is unlike anything in our database. Show me. The main view screen flickered. The empty starfield was replaced by a tactical display, and Drex felt something he had not experienced in 10,000 years of warfare. He felt fear. The ships surrounding the Concorde Armada were massive beyond comprehension. The smallest of them was larger than Drex's flagship by a factor of 10. The largest were the size of small moons, their hulls stretching for hundreds of kilometers in every direction. They were angular and strange, built according to design principles that no Concorde engineer would recognize. And they were old. Drex could see it in the scoring on their hulls, the patchwork repairs, the scars of weapons fire from battles fought before his species had existed. These ships had been sailing the stars for longer than the Concorde had been keeping records. Where did they come from? Korath whispered. How did the humans build these? Drex stared at the screen. His mind was racing, trying to process what he was seeing. The humans had been watched for 300 years. Every shipyard they built was monitored. Every construction project was catalogued. There was no possible way they could have hidden a fleet of this size. Unless they hadn't built it at all. The communication systems crackled. A human face appeared on every screen across the Concorde Armada. It was an old man with dark skin and white hair, wearing the uniform of Earth's military. His eyes were tired but steady. I am Admiral James Okonkwo of the United Earth Defense Force. The man said, to all vessels of the Galactic Concorde, you have entered restricted space. You are surrounded. Your weapons cannot harm us. Your shields cannot stop us. This is not a battle you can win. Drex found his voice. What is this? What are these ships? Okonkwo paused, and something like sadness crossed his face. We found them, High Commander. 300 years ago, when humanity first ventured beyond our home system, we discovered a graveyard of ships drifting in the void near Alpha Centauri. They had been there for over 2 million years, waiting in the darkness for someone to find them. 2 million years. The words hit Drex like a physical blow. 2 million years ago. His species had been primitive creatures crawling through swamps on their homeworld. 2 million years ago, no species in the Concorde had achieved fire, let alone spaceflight. The builders are long dead, Okonkwo continued. Their civilization rose and fell before any of ours existed. We found their ships. We found their records. We learned their language. And we discovered that they had left these vessels as a gift, a final legacy for whatever species came after them. Why? Drex managed to ask. Why hide this? Why pretend to be weak? The sadness in Okonkwo's eyes deepened. Because we had a choice to make. High Commander, when we found these ships, we could have used them immediately. We could have declared ourselves masters of the galaxy. We could have built an empire that none could challenge. The temptation was enormous, but we didn't. We held a vote. Every human alive was asked a simple question. What kind of species do we want to be? And by a clear majority, we chose to hide what we had found. We chose to earn our place in the galaxy through patience and merit, not through inherited power. We chose to keep these ships as a deterrent of last resort, revealed only if our survival demanded it. Drex's mandibles clicked together in confusion. You chose to be weak. We chose to be wise, Okonkwo replied. The species that built these ships, the ones who sailed the stars before anyone else, they were powerful beyond imagining. And yet they are gone. Their civilization is dust. All their strength couldn't save them. We looked at their legacy, and we asked ourselves what really mattered. Was it power? Was it conquest? Or was it the choice to use power responsibly? On the bridge of Drex's flagship, officers were reporting in from across the Armada. Weapons systems were being scrambled by unknown interference. Shield generators were fluctuating wildly. Navigation computers were showing errors that should have been impossible. The ancient ships had not fired a single shot, but they had already disabled the Concorde fleet. You could have destroyed us at any time, Drex realized. From the moment we crossed into human space. Yes, Okonkwo admitted. We could have. We still can. These ships carry weapons that could crack planets. Their shields have already absorbed your weapon's fire without registering damage. If we chose to use their full power, Your entire armada would cease to exist in approximately 47 seconds. The number was so precise, so calmly stated, that it took Drex a moment to process it. 47 seconds. For 1,000 ships. The combined might of the Concorde erased in less than a minute. But we won't, Okonkwo said. Because that's not who we are. That's not who we chose to be 300 years ago. We don't want to conquer the galaxy, High Commander. We don't want to rule over other species. We want to be your neighbors. We want to be your partners. We want to help build something better than empires and ultimatums. Drex looked around his bridge. His officers had stopped working. They were staring at their screens, at the impossible ships that surrounded them, at the human admiral whose face gazed down from every view screen. For the first time in his long life, Drex did not know what to do. We are giving you a choice, Okonkwo said. The same choice we gave ourselves 3 centuries ago. You can turn around. You can take your armada home. You can tell the Concorde that humanity wishes to remain independent, and that this wish will be resp. 300 years earlier, the colony ship Prometheus had been drifting through the darkness near Alpha Centauri. Captain Maria Santos had been running low on hope. Her ship's fuel reserves were at 17%. The engine repairs they had attempted last month had failed. They were still 2 years from the nearest human colony, and the mathematics said they would run out of power in 8 months. She was composing a final message to her family when the sensors detected something impossible. At first, Santos thought it was an asteroid field. The readings showed thousands of large objects drifting in a loose formation, each one massive enough to register on long-range scanners. But asteroids didn't have this kind of regular spacing. Asteroids didn't have metallic hulls. Asteroids didn't have the faint energy signatures that her science officer was now detecting. Captain, Lieutenant Chen said, his voice barely a whisper. These are ships. Santos stared at the display. That's impossible. We're the first humans to reach this sector. There are no other spacefaring species within 50 light years. These ships aren't from any species we know, Chen replied. Look at the carbon dating. Look at the hull composition. Captain, these vessels are approximately 2 million years old. The Prometheus approached the nearest ship slowly, carefully, every sensor straining to gather data. What they found changed everything. The ships were enormous, far larger than anything humans had ever built. Their designs were angular and strange, following principles that human engineers could not immediately understand. Their hulls were scarred by ancient damage, pitted by micrometeorites and scored by weapons that no longer existed. But they were intact. After 2 million years of drifting in the void, they were still intact. Santos ordered a boarding party. She led it herself, because she had to see with her own eyes what was inside. What she found was a civilization frozen in time. The builders had been roughly humanoid, based on the control interfaces and the few preserved remains they discovered. They had been technologically advanced beyond anything humanity had imagined. Their ships used power sources that human scientists would spend decades trying to understand. Their weapons could have shattered moons. Their shields could have stopped stars, and they were all dead. The records Santos found told a story that stretched back millions of years. The builders, who called themselves something that human tongues could not pronounce, had been the first spacefaring species in the galaxy. They had risen alone, with no other civilizations to guide them or threaten them. They had spread across the stars, building an empire that encompassed thousands of worlds. And then something had happened. The records were unclear on the details. Some kind of catastrophe, perhaps natural, perhaps of their own making. The empire had collapsed. The builders had died out, leaving behind only their ships and their knowledge, preserved in the hope that someone would find them someday. The final entry in the builders' records was a message addressed to whoever came next. We were the first, the message said. We thought that meant we would be the greatest. We were wrong. We built weapons because we feared what might come after us. We built empires because we could not imagine any other way. In the end, our weapons could not save us, and our empires crumbled to dust. Learn from our mistakes. Do not repeat them. Use what we have left you wisely. Santos brought this message back to Earth. She brought the ships, towing them one by one through the darkness until they reached the hidden facility that would become their home. And she brought the question that would define humanity's future. What do we do with this? The debate lasted 5 years. Every government on Earth weighed in. Every colony sent representatives. Scientists analyzed the technology. Philosophers debated the ethics. Military leaders drew up plans for conquest and defense. Religious leaders spoke of divine providence and moral responsibility. In the end, the decision was put to the people. Every human alive was given a vote. The question was simple. Should we use these ships to establish human dominance over the galaxy? Or should we hide them and earn our place through our own efforts? The vote was close. 47% voted for immediate use. They argued that humanity had been given a gift and should not waste it. They pointed out that other species would try to conquer humanity eventually, and that it was better to strike first from a position of strength. But 53% voted to hide the ships. They argued that power inherited was not power earned. They quoted the builders' final message about weapons and empires and mistakes. They spoke of the kind of species humanity wanted to become, not just the kind of power it wanted to wield. The decision was made. The ships would be hidden. A small group of volunteers would be trained to maintain them and operate them if necessary. But humanity would enter the galactic stage as newcomers, pretending to be just another young species finding its way among the stars. It was the hardest choice humanity had ever made, and for 300 years, they kept that choice secret. Now, in the present, Admiral Okonkwo stood on the bridge of the Prometheus's Burden, the largest of the ancient ships. Through the view screen, he could see the Concorde Armada frozen in the void, surrounded by the fleet that humanity had hidden for so long. Beside him stood Captain Yuki Tanaka and Ambassador Elena Vasquez. They had come aboard to witness this moment, the moment when the secret was finally revealed. "Do you think they'll back down?" Tanaka asked. Okonkwo shook his head slowly. "I don't know. I hope so. But the Concorde has been masters of this galaxy for a very long time. It's hard to give up that kind of power." "We did," Vasquez pointed out. "We gave up power that made theirs look like nothing. That's different. We never had the chance to get used to it. We made our choice before we knew what it felt like to rule. The Concorde has been ruling for 90,000 years. That kind of habit is hard to break." On the tactical display, the Concorde Armada had stopped moving. They were holding position, waiting for orders from High Commander Drex. The ancient ships surrounded them in a loose formation, not threatening, but not withdrawing either. Okonkwo thought about the builders, the species that had created these vessels millions of years ago. He wondered what they would think if they could see this moment. Their ships, their legacy, being used not to conquer but to prevent conquest. Their weapons, built for war, being used to preserve peace. He hoped they would approve. "Admiral," one of his officers reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the Concorde flagship. High Commander Drex is requesting a direct communication. Put him through." Drex's face appeared on the view screen. The Kethrani commander looked older than he had a few hours ago, as if the weight of what he had learned had pressed years into his features. "Admiral Okonkwo," Drex said, "I have consulted with my fellow commanders. We have questions. I expected you would. Your species found these ships 300 years ago. You had the power to destroy us at any point since then. You could have prevented the Concorde from forming in the first place. You could have made yourselves masters of the galaxy before any of us achieved spaceflight." Drex paused. "Why didn't you?" Okonkwo considered the question carefully. It was the same question humanity had asked itself 3 centuries ago. The answer had not changed. "Because we looked at the builders and we saw our future," he said. "They were powerful. They were advanced. They had everything we could ever want. And they are gone. Their civilization is dust. Their empire is forgotten. All their weapons couldn't save them from whatever ended them. We realized that power wasn't the answer. Conquest wasn't the answer. The builders had tried that path and it led them to extinction. We decided to try something different. We decided to earn our place in the galaxy through patience and kindness, through trade and diplomacy, through being good neighbors rather than good conquerors." "Was it difficult?" Drex asked. "To hide this power while others treated you as inferior?" Okonkwo smiled slightly. "Every single day. We were mocked. We were cheated. We were pushed around by species who thought they were better than us. There were times when people wanted to reveal the ships, to show the galaxy what we really had. But we kept our promise. We stuck to our choice. Why? Because the choice was who we wanted to be. And we decided that we wanted to be the kind of species that could have power and choose not to use it. We wanted to be the kind of species that could be insulted and choose not to retaliate. We wanted to prove, to ourselves most of all, that humanity could be trusted with this kind of power. Drex was silent for a long moment. On the tactical display, the Concorde Armada remained motionless. The Concorde has never faced anything like this, Drex admitted. In 90,000 years, we have never encountered a species that chose weakness when it could have had strength. We have never met a people who had power and refused to use it. That's why we're offering you the same choice we made, Okonkwo replied. You can turn around. You can go home. You can tell the Concorde that humanity will be treated as equals from now on, or we will be left alone. If you do this, we will return to pretending. The galaxy can forget what it learned today, and you would trust us. After we came here with an invasion fleet, we would give you the chance to earn that trust, the same way we've been trying to earn the galaxy's trust for 300 years. Drex looked at Okonkwo for a long moment. Then he turned away from the screen. When he turned back, the debates lasted for 3 days, across 4,000 ships. The species of the Concorde argued about what to do. Some called for retreat. Others demanded attack, insisting that humanity's ancient ships could not be as powerful as they appeared. A few suggested surrender, though they spoke quietly and only among trusted friends. High Commander Drex listened to all of it. He reviewed the sensor data again and again, hoping to find some weakness in the ancient fleet that surrounded his armada. He found nothing. On the third day, he received a message from the Concorde Council itself. The 12 ruling species had convened an emergency session on the home world. They had reviewed the situation. They had made their decision. Drex read the message with his heart sinking in his chest. The council ordered him to attack. They did not believe that the ancient ships could be as powerful as humanity claimed. They insisted that it must be a bluff, a trick designed to frighten the Concorde into retreat. They demanded that Drex test the human defenses with a limited strike, just enough to prove that the ancient vessels could be damaged. Drex stood on his bridge with the message displayed on his private screen. Around him, his officers worked their stations in tense silence. They did not know what the council had ordered. They did not know that their commander had been asked to lead them to their deaths. He thought about his career. 90,000 years of Kathrani military tradition flowed in his blood. He had been raised to follow orders, to trust the wisdom of the council, to believe that the Concorde always knew best. But he had also seen the ancient ships with his own eyes. He had felt their power pressing against his senses like a weight on his soul. He knew, with a certainty that went beyond reason, that attacking them would mean the end of everything. Drex made his choice. He opened a channel to the entire Concorde Armada. Every ship, every officer, every soldier heard his words. This is High Commander Drex. I have received orders from the Concorde Council to engage the human fleet. I am refusing those orders. The silence that followed was absolute. The council believes this is a bluff. Drex continued. They are wrong. I have seen the power of these ships. Our weapons cannot scratch their shields. Our technology is children's toys compared to what humanity has hidden. If we attack, we will die. All of us. In less than a minute, he paused, gathering his thoughts. I have served the Concorde for 10,000 years. I have never disobeyed an order. But I will not lead 4,000 ships to their destruction for the sake of pride. I will not sacrifice the lives of my soldiers, because the council cannot accept that. We are not the greatest power in the galaxy. We are turning around. We are going home. Any commander who wishes to remain and carry out the council's orders is welcome to do so. But I will not be with you. The channel closed. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, one by one, the ships of the Concorde Armada began to turn. First a few, then dozens, then hundreds. Drex watched as the vessels under his command realigned toward home. Leaving the Kepler threshold behind, not a single ship stayed to attack. On the bridge of the Prometheus's burden, Admiral Okonkwo watched the Concorde fleet withdraw. Beside him, Ambassador Vasquez had tears in her eyes. They're leaving, she whispered. They're actually leaving. Drex made his choice, Okonkwo replied. He chose wisdom over pride. I didn't think he had it in him. What happens now? Now we wait to see what the council does. Drex disobeyed a direct order. That won't go unanswered. They didn't have to wait long. Within hours, news arrived that the Concord Council had stripped Drex of his command. He was being recalled to the homeworld to face charges of treason. The council was demanding that another commander take control of the Armada and resume the attack. No one accepted. Across the Concord, commanders who had served for thousands of years suddenly discovered reasons why they could not lead an assault on human space. Ships developed mysterious engine problems. Communication systems malfunctioned at critical moments. The bureaucracy of the Concord, which had always been famous for its efficiency, ground to a halt. The truth was spreading. Not just the truth about humanity's hidden fleet, but the truth about what humanity had chosen to do with that power. Stories passed from species to species, from world to world. The humans had found the weapons of gods. They had hidden them for 3 centuries. They had endured mockery and mistreatment and unfair trade deals, all because they wanted to earn their place in the galaxy rather than take it by force. And when they finally revealed their power, they used it to offer their enemies a chance to walk away. For many in the Concord, this was impossible to understand. Power was meant to be used. Strength was meant to be demonstrated. The idea that a species would choose restraint when it could choose domination was simply unthinkable, but for others, it was a revelation. Terrace, the Morellian scholar who had tried so hard to warn the Concord about what humanity was hiding, found herself at the center of a growing movement. Her research on human culture was suddenly in high demand. Species that had dismissed humanity for centuries now wanted to understand them. She gave lectures. She wrote papers. She spoke to councils and assemblies across the Concord. And she always delivered the same message. Humanity is not what we thought they were. She would say, we believed they were a young species, primitive and easily controlled. We were wrong. They are something new, something we have never seen before. They are a species that understands that true strength is not about power. It is about the choice to use power wisely. Slowly, the Concord began to change. It was not a fast process. Institutions that had existed for tens of thousands of years did not transform overnight. But the cracks were appearing. The old certainties were fading. A new possibility was emerging. Perhaps the galaxy did not need masters. Perhaps it needed partners. 1 year after the confrontation at the Kepler threshold, a new treaty was signed between humanity and the Concord. It was not a treaty of surrender or domination. It was a treaty of equals, recognizing humanity's right to independence while establishing frameworks for cooperation and trade. At the signing ceremony, Ambassador Elena Vasquez represented humanity. Across from her sat Drex, who had been quietly pardoned after the public mood shifted in his favor. He had retired from military service and now served as a diplomatic advisor, helping to bridge the gap between the Concord and humanity. I still don't understand, Drex said quietly, as the other delegates celebrated around them. You had the power to destroy us. You had every reason to take revenge for how we treated you. Why didn't you? Elena smiled. It was the same calm smile she had worn in the Concord chamber a year ago, when Drex had delivered his ultimatum. Because that's not who we are, she said. We made a choice 300 years ago. We decided what kind of species we wanted to be. We chose to be the kind of people who could have power and choose not to use it. We chose to be the kind of people who could be hurt and choose not to hurt back. That choice defines us. It's not just something we believe. It's something we do every day, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Drex's compound eyes flickered. And if we had attacked, if we had refused to turn back, Elena's smile faded slightly. Then we would have defended ourselves. We would have done what was necessary to protect our people. But we would have taken no joy in it. And we would have offered you peace again, as soon as the fighting stopped. You would have spared us, even after we tried to destroy you. We would have given you the chance to become better. That's all any of us can do in the end. Give each other chances. Drex was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, he extended one of his hands. Elena took it. Perhaps, he said, the Concord has much to learn from humanity after all. Far away. In the darkness between the stars, the ancient ships had returned to their hiding places. They drifted in the void, their lights dimmed, their weapons silent. They had been waiting for 2 million years for someone to find them. Now they waited for a different reason. They waited for the day when they would never be needed again. The day when the galaxy would finally learn the lesson that humanity had learned 3 centuries ago. The day when every species would understand that true strength was not about power or conquest or domination. True strength was about the choice to build instead of destroy, to heal instead of wound, to offer hands instead of fists. Humanity had made that choice, and slowly, one species at a time, the galaxy was beginning to make it to on Earth. In a small apartment in New Tokyo, an old woman named Yuki Tanaka, former captain of the Prometheus's Burden, watched the news of the treaty signing. She was retired now, her part in the great secret finally complete. On her desk sat a framed photograph. It showed her great-great-grandmother, Maria Santos, standing before one of the ancient ships on the day of their discovery. In the photo, Santos looked young and hopeful, her eyes full of wonder at what she had found. Beside the photograph was a copy of the vote from 300 years ago. Yuki's ancestor had been one of the 53% who chose to hide the ships. In the margin, in faded handwriting, Maria Santos had written a note. "The universe is watching to see what kind of species we are. Today we gave our answer." Yuki touched the photograph gently. Outside her window,